I guess I'll back up and say that in one of my courses, we were learning about cider production, and in Washington State in 2006, there was 85,000 gallons produced.
Okay.
That sounds like a lot, but it's not.
Right.
Flash forward to 2016, 850,000 gallons produced, and in that interim, nobody planted these special cider apple trees, and so I saw a gap there, and we went and canvassed the area and asked local cider makers in the region if they'd be interested in these special apples, and every single one said we'd buy every apple you could produce.
Hey Islanders, and welcome to episode 189 of the Camano Voice. Today I speak with a cider maker, orchardist, the first certified pommelier in Skagit County, as well as the owner and founder of both Bitters and Sharps Orchard and Alma Cider. Please welcome Dave Klawer. Hi, I'm Brandon Erickson, and you're listening to the Camano Voice podcast, where I interview local business owners, comedians, singers, and more. I dive into their backstory to find out how they got where they are, what are some of the tips for you to do the same, and find out where they are going. Tune in every week as I interview more of the people you see every day. Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Camano Voice, where we release a new episode every Tuesday. And I am excited for this episode where we get to talk about all things apple and cider. But the reason, or at least one of the reasons that we are doing this episode today, is Dave is also collaborating with us in the first annual Camano Ciderfest. So we are so excited for that today. We've got that coming out this coming September 2nd, Saturday, September 2nd. We have 2 windows you can sign up for. It's a ticketed event. So this is kind of our first foray into ticketed events here. But we're super excited. Each ticket gets you a commemorative tasting glass that you get to take home with you. And then also gets you, I think, 6 to 8 samples. I don't remember exactly, but you get samples of cider. That's the important thing. We're going to have merch available for purchase. You're going to be, I think a lot of the ciders are actually bringing their bottles and stuff for sale as well. So you'll be able to do that. So we're just really excited about this event. It's coming up here. Again, Saturday, September 2nd, there's an 11 o'clock and a 2 o'clock tasting time slot. We're going to have live music. It's going to be a great time. Plus, we've got the new Primal open here at the complex. So that's a barbecue place opened by the same owners as Tapped Camano, so you know they're going to be good. And I've eaten there far too many times this last week. Be sure to check them out. Of course, Bake Cafe is going to be there. Subjoint will be there. Tapped and Primal. So you got all the options there for food. Again, Camano Ciderfest, sign up. I will have a link in the description of this podcast below, so be sure to go down there. Sign up now before tickets sell out. They are $35 online, or they will be $40 at the door. Besides that, be sure to check it out. It's going to be a good time. So, but not only do we want to get Dave on the podcast to talk about Ciderfest, but we also wanted to talk to him about cider making. So, as I mentioned in his titles, he was the first certified pommelier in Skagit County, which a pommelier is like a sommelier, or I forget the beer name one, but basically, I think most people know what a sommelier is with wine, right? They are a wine taster. There's a pretty rigorous testing for it all. And ciders actually have a very similar thing, and that's what a pommelier is. So he is well-versed in that. He is one of the early adopters of growing cider apples in Skagit County and in this area. And so we get into all the different things about different apples, ciders, things like that, the process for it. And we even get into some lore, like Johnny Appleseed lore. So that was fun. So we get into all sorts of things and more. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Dave Klawer. Hey Islanders, and welcome to another episode of the Camano Voice. Today I'm here with the first certified pommelier in Skagit County, as well as the owner and founder of Alma Cider and Bitters and Sharps Orchard. Welcome to the podcast, Dave Klawer.
Hey, thanks a lot. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So before we get started, tell us a little bit about Dave.
So I am I grew up in Southern California, and I'm a registered nurse. And I became a travel nurse in about 2006 and traveled over the western U.S. And that's how I came to Washington State. I wanted to be a pro snowboarder back in the 90s, and
Okay.
I hurt myself pretty bad down in the Andes in South America. And I had seen a video of the world record snowfall in Mount Baker, Washington. And when I had the opportunity to travel here as a nurse, I jumped on it. And I came here in 2008, and now I'm from Washington.
All right. Awesome. Very cool. What was the as far as snowboarding is concerned, was that something your family was really into, or did you just really get into it?
Yeah, so we grew up by the beach and grew up surfing and skateboarding, and my family would take winter trips. And I just really fell in love with the sport and kind of floating down the mountain. And so I kept at it and tried to get bigger and better, and then went too big. And so that ended any professional opportunities. But I still get down the mountain now. I just kind of take it slow and mellow.
Yeah, very cool. During that time, who were the pro snowboarders?
Let's see. I'm totally blanking. I don't even have a good answer
good.
for you right now.
Because that was before Shaun White then, right?
Yeah, this was about like 94 when I got injured. So, I wish I could give you that.
They're not ones that, like, Shaun White's probably the only pro snowboarder I know.
Yeah.
And that's probably mainly because I followed Tony Hawk for a long time, and then Shaun White came out with a snowboarding video game, and that's probably why I know the name.
Right. And he was on the Olympic team. So, prior to the snowboarding being an Olympic sport, we just like to get out there and carve down the mountain.
Yeah, very cool. So, as you were growing up, was nursing and cider, were any of these things on your radar? Or
No. So I thought about going to school for viticulture at UC Davis. Viticulture is growing grapes for wine.
Okay.
And my folks discouraged me from that and said, I don't know if there's a lot of money in growing grapes for wine. So I went to school for fisheries, and then I got married and was going to have a baby, and wasn't earning enough money. I really liked working outside, but I went back to school for nursing, and then got to a point where pretty stable in life, and was thinking again about, growing stuff and working outside. And so I thought maybe I'd have a vineyard. And everybody's like, why would you have a vineyard? You're a nurse. So I decided, well, I'll go get my master's in agriculture.
Okay.
And now everybody's like, yeah, it makes sense to have an orchard. So here where we live in the northwestern part of Washington, apples grow really well.
Yep.
And actually I kind of fell into luck right in my hometown, Mount Vernon, Washington, where we grow apples and make cider. The Washington State University Extension is there.
Yep.
And they actually have the largest cider apple research facility in the United States in terms of numbers of cultivars of apples. So I kind of fell into that as far as, hey, this grows well here, and I could still make something with this. And so that's sort of how that came about. We went and canvassed the area. I guess I'll back up and say that in one of my courses, we were learning about cider production, and in Washington State in 2006, there was 85,000 gallons produced.
Okay.
That sounds like a lot, but it's not.
Right.
Flash forward to 2016, 850,000 gallons produced, and in that interim, nobody planted these special cider apple trees, and so I saw a gap there. And we went and canvassed the area and asked local cider makers in the region if they'd be interested in these special apples. And every single one said, we'd buy every apple you could produce. And so there was a need and a gap. And so we started making apple trees in 2019. We graft the trees and then grow them and pick the fruit and then press it and then ferment and age the juice to make cider. And so, yeah, I guess that's how that came about.
Yeah. So, okay, this is a question I've didn't know. Like, I've heard it, and now I'm like, is that really true? Because I thought I've heard both ways. But when it comes to apple trees and apples in general, if you just plant a seed, does it always turn into a crab apple tree?
Yeah, so it'll turn into whatever kind of tree. We don't know because the flowers are heterogeneous. So it could be pollinated by whatever other flower within a mile, and that could produce its very own type of apple. So a typical apple will have 5 or 6 seeds in it, and of those 5 or 6 seeds, you'll get 5 or 6 different types of apples.
Wow.
So if you want to grow something that's true to what you think it will be, the way to do that is through clonal propagation or grafting.
Okay.
So we graft about 1,000 trees every spring. And so say you like that tree in your yard and you want to produce more of those exact trees, we'll cut a little cutting of that, and then we'll purchase rootstock, which is the root portion that's underground of the tree, and then we will graft, connect the scion wood, which is the tree in your yard, to the rootstock, and then the rootstock is chosen for its different characteristics, so it'll determine the height of the tree, the vigor, so how fast it grows, the precocity, so how early it puts on fruit, as well as for different pathogen-resistant characteristics. And then the part on top, the scion, becomes what you see out of the ground and what produces that type of fruit that you liked.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's crazy. They're like the cats of the fruit kingdom.
Right. So if you were to go to a vineyard and you ate a grape, it wouldn't taste good. Because it's not made for eating, it's made for fermenting.
Yeah.
And so it has those characteristics. And so true cider fruit, they're not really made for eating, they're made for fermenting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what now obviously we're in Washington, so apples becomes a natural choice. But what was it that kind of drove you towards apples versus continue on with the idea of growing grapes?
So there's actually a long-standing history here in this area for apple production, for cider production.
Okay.
And if we went backwards in time, beyond the colonial days, the most drank beverage in the United States was cider. And the reason for that is low ABV, low alcohol content, and it was safer to drink than water. And so all over the country, as the country was expanding and growing, workers and other homesteaders migrated west, and the way they decided which farms to work at, partially by figuring out who made the best ciders. And so actually in the San Juan Islands here near where we are, there's a lot of history, over 160 years of cider production in this area.
Okay.
And so here in this area, we get ample rain most of the year, and then we have moderate climate, doesn't get too hot, too cold, and then nice dry summers. And so it's really ideal for this condition, ideal conditions for growing apples. If you look at where we're at, so about 43 latitude on the globe.
Yeah.
If you went straight across, you would find the apple growing regions in Normandy, France, and also throughout England and Spain. A lot of these places that have kept this tradition on for hundreds of years.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very cool. So so talking about the kind of that history of cider, I remember when I was in college is right when they kind of started having this resurgence. Like, I remember we got Hornsby into the convenience store, and then we got Angry Orchards. What was it that you felt kind of catalyzed this reintroduction of this old drink beverage?
I think people want to know where their produce is from and where stuff is grown, and the craft side of it is really phenomenal. So as I said, I graft these trees and then carefully grow them until they produce fruit, and then I'm picking the fruit, and then I'm pressing and making juice and then fermenting it. I'm in control as much as I can be outside of nature for the whole process. And I think that's been part of the resurgence is people want to know what they're consuming and where it's from.
Yeah.
And so the locality of this is pretty special. Other companies that you mentioned, national companies who are just cranking out millions of gallons. It's kind of a different product. So
Yes.
Ours, I want to think is we're kind of an elevated high tier product where because of the care that we take to grow and produce the product, it's really like nothing else.
Yeah. Well, and speaking of that, I was just trying to think the other day, and I go through the beer section and cider section of most of my grocery stores in the area. I haven't seen Hornsby's in a long time. Are they no longer around? Do you know?
I don't know. Yeah, it's hard to keep track. So I know we're lucky in our region here near on Camano. We have excellent cider up in Skagit. We have excellent cider in Whatcom County, Snohomish County, King County, and then on the other side of the mountains, where 90% of the country's apples are grown. There's plenty of apples here, and so there's a lot of opportunity to make really good cider.
Yeah. Well, and that's probably been the biggest thing for me. So I when I turned 21, off the bat, I wasn't a huge beer drinker, but I enjoyed the hard ciders. Then eventually got into beer, but those ciders, they were like from Hornsby's and Angry Orchards, which was a very kind of, it's not great, right? Especially if you drink it now in comparison. And so I got used to those ones. It's like, they're not really that exciting. There's not too much uniqueness to them. But then I tried Camano cider and their pub cider, and that was something I'd never tasted a cider like that.
Yeah, so I think the difference is that on a national level, they're probably mass producing. They're using commodity bulk juice, and they're want it to have a certain sweetness level to have this mass appeal.
Yep.
And your palate probably has matured since your first early college days. And so you're looking for something a little bit more complex, probably drier. And that's kind of, if you wanted to have a snapshot description of northwestern Washington cider, it's going to be, have some tartness to it, some good acid, and then be dry.
Yeah, very cool. So you started growing these orchards. Tell me about what came first. Did you found Alma cider first, or did you get with Bitters and Sharps Orchard?
Yeah, so Bitters and Sharps is the name of my company, and it's actually an orchard management company. We do custom grafting.
Okay.
If anybody needs some apple trees, a couple for their yard or a couple thousand for their farm, hit us up and we can make those trees. So as I said earlier, we kind of I wanted to be outside and working and growing things. And so when we did our initial canvassing, people were excited about the apples, as were we, so we started making trees. Literally, having an orchard is just digging a hole in the ground and throwing money into it. And so there's no return on investment for 5 to 7 years. And so that's kind of hard if you're sort of bootstrapping it, as I am doing.
Yeah.
And so we found that making cider can bring in profits sooner. And so we just started making cider in order to pay for the orchard, pretty much.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nice. Where does the name Alma cider come from?
Yeah, so if apples originate in Central Asia, in the Tian Mountains, in Kazakhstan.
Okay.
If you were to walk out there in the forest, you would see wild apples and wild plums. These wild apple forests, if you go back to pre-Greek times, were distributed throughout their trading routes, and then came west and east, I suppose. And modern day apple all kind of comes from that lineage. And the first word for apple there is Alma. And so Alma is kind of the OG word for apple. It also has cool meanings elsewhere in the world. So Alma in Latin means nurturing spirit. In Spanish, it means soul. And so we thought, we kind of put our heart and spirit and soul into creating these beverages.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's very cool. Have you ever been able to go visit Kazakhstan?
No. So nowadays, not too long ago, I think it's within the 10 years that the forests are protected, and so you need some really big connections to be able to go into these protected regions. I know several people who have gone, but I've not made it yet.
Okay.
Bucket list, though.
Yeah, very cool. So, complete side tangent. So is the story of Johnny Appleseed all fake then?
No, and actually, he's buried here in Washington State.
Really?
Yep.
Okay.
So his last name is Chapman, John Chapman, and so I think it was probably romanticized a bit, but he did travel across the country towards the West Coast and helped propagate apple trees. So I think, from what I know, on his route, he would stop near a river and then plant, hundreds or thousands of seeds.
Okay.
And those would be good to make the rootstock. And then he'd come back through that area and then graft on whatever varieties were popular at the time. And then he was a nurseryman and he sold the trees. But a lot of how cider and cider fruit kind of migrated across the country were due to people like him.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very cool. So you mentioned that apples come from Kazakhstan. Is the environment they have there very similar to what we have here?
Well, it's similar in terms of like where it is latitude-wise.
Okay.
It is different as far as in relation to the coast. So in the mountains, kind of foothills is where those grow. And so here we are fortunate enough that we have, we're bordered by these volcanoes to our east, which over time the rivers have washed all this beautiful glacial till and volcanic soil along with the alluvial drainage that came with the rivers. And so on our west, we have the Salish Sea, and so we're protected on two sides. And we have, I saw an account once that the soil in Skagit Valley is in the top 6 of the world.
Wow.
And stuff just grows phenomenally here.
Yeah.
Other than that, I don't think there's too much similarities.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nice. Very cool. So when working with ciders, obviously you use apples in that, but have you used and experimented with other fruits and stuff in it as well?
So I'm kind of a traditionalist. So we make a perry, and perry is the equivalent to cider made from apples, but perry is made just from pears.
Okay.
And there are actually perry pears that are specific to perry making. And so not good for eating either.
Okay.
But so we make a delightful perry. That one just won a double gold award.
Congrats.
Thank you. And then other than that, we make some single varietal ciders because I want people to know what this fruit actually tastes like.
Yeah.
And I don't usually use lots of adjuncts, adding other fruits. Having said that, we did pick 100 pounds of cherries this year that I preserved in a way that might make a cherry infused cider down the line. But I kind of just like the apples.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very cool. So when it comes to making ciders out of being kind of that purist, what are ways that you augment your apples, your ciders, and stuff like that to give them different flavors and tones?
So I think the apple itself can be quite different. Some are more aromatic, some are more bitter, some are sharper. And then, of course, the yeast is really the the driver that controls the flavor, in my opinion. So
Okay.
there's different types of yeast. We often use white wine or champagne yeast, but you could have one apple pressed and then split into two vessels and use two different yeasts, and it'll come out totally different.
Okay.
So that's pretty interesting. I think so. While we do make some single varietal ciders that I want to showcase just what that apple has, I think blends are kind of the ultimate, in my opinion, because, as I said, some apples are more aromatic, some are more sharp, higher acid, some are more bitter, and really kind of marrying these different fruits together prior or post fermentation, what I think can give ciders that are unmatched by single varietals.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's something I've been kind of experimenting with when it comes to wines. For a long time, I was like, I want to learn like the main wines and try the different. But what I found is I like a lot of the blends.
Oh yeah,
because they smooth out any of those like peaks or valleys, and you drink it and you're like, oh, I could drink 2-3 glasses of this.
Yeah, right. So I remember hearing this story on NPR about this really fancy cheesemaker in Northern California, and she was talking about the secret to her mac and cheese. And these wheels are like $30 for like a 2-inch wheel of cheese. And she said, my secret is I put 5 types of cheese in it. And that always kind of resonated with me, because I think, where something is lacking, as you said, another thing can contribute, and it can make a more complex and more round end result. So I really like doing some blends.
Yeah, for sure. That's actually something we talk about when I talk to people about our coffee. Our espresso blend is actually a blend. Most of our other coffees are not, but the reason for that is the espresso, it's very hot, very fast, and it's high pressure. So the water goes through there really quick. So we tried it when my dad was building the company, he would try some of his favorite single origin coffees, but you would just get a little bit of one of those flavor notes, and you wouldn't get a complete flavor.
Oh.
And so we found by combining it, you get the stronger notes of multiple coffees, and that gets you this espresso shot.
Yeah, exactly.
So
speaking of coffee, like at home, I really like Guatemalan coffee. I think the acid's not too high,
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes I'll be really pleasantly surprised when I have a nice blend that's marries these attributes, just like you said.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think I feel like a lot of times in like the upper world echelons of some of these coffee, wine, cider, it's like all about the single origin, but it's like, well, sometimes if you break the rule a little bit and you blend, you actually end up with kind of a better product.
Yeah, and that's actually mostly my philosophy. So I do make single varietals because people like to know, what this actual apple tastes like.
Mm-hmm.
And some apples are fantastic by themselves. I think just in the United States, there's like 7,000 types of apples.
Yep.
And it can be even better because nothing is perfect on its own. I think unity is kind of the key to life and diversity. So definitely marrying these flavors, it will, in my mind, produce an even better cider.
Yeah, very cool. So we mentioned at the top of the show that you were the first pommelier in Skagit. What is a pommelier, and what are kind of the steps to become that?
Yeah, so the wine world has a similar certification called sommelier, and that is a wine expert. And beer has a cicerone, which is a beer expert. And I wanted to know everything that I could about cider so that I could make the best possible cider. And so luckily the American Cider Association, if you go to their website, they have 2 different classes of certified cider professionals. And so the first one is mostly for people in the industry, so people working in restaurants and bars, if they wanted to know more about cider, so that if a customer comes in and asks, they are able to explain it intelligently.
Gently. That's a long word.
Yeah. And so I took that test, and just through having read many books already on the subject, it was pretty straightforward, and I was able to pass pretty well. So if you wanted to go even further beyond that and be a true expert in cider, you could become a certified pommelier, and that's a certified cider professional 2. And so it's actually a pretty rigorous test. So good to have tried lots of ciders and read lots of books. Luckily, since this topic interested me already, I had already read many of the books on their suggested reading list. But then you fly out. So now I flew that year to Virginia and sat for the test at CiderCon. So they have one every year. It's always in Chicago, and then every other year it's East Coast, West Coast. So this coming year in beginning of 2024, it'll be in Portland. If anybody's into cider, you should go check it out.
Okay.
But so I flew to Richmond and sat for the test. It was a 4-hour written test on all things cider, so history of cider, types of cider apples, cider growing regions, food pairings, like anything you could think about cider. I had not written that much because it was a written test in years, and my hand was like cramped. So after the written portion, then there's the sensory analysis portion. And so it's about an hour and a half or 2 hours. You taste ciders and have to list attributes. So for instance, they put 3 ciders in front of you. You have to do like a head-to-toe assessment. I call it that because I'm a nurse. But basically, you look at the color, the clarity, the carbonation, and then you smell it for the aroma profile, and then the flavor profile, and then the body, the length, acid sweetness, bitterness. So they put these 3 ciders. You have to fully describe them. And 6 other pommeliers who did not take the test together wrote their notes, and yours have to match theirs. Also, you have to tell where in the world did this come from? And if so, what apple do you think was used in it? And so it's a pretty hard test. And actually, I had to take the sensory analysis portion twice, which isn't uncommon. I think they had like a 3% pass rate. And so, that was about 2 years ago. And so now I help with sensory analysis. We just did a virtual tasting with the American Cider Association just last month that went well. For people who are interested in cider, they want to taste and experience more ciders. They want to learn how to do a sensory analysis. And also for people who want to become certified pommeliers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How do you suggest, because this is something I was looking up when it came to wine as well, when you're trying to learn flavors and profiles. Mm-hmm. What are your suggestions to people that want to increase their palate, increase their ability to kind of distinguish these very fine margins?
Yeah, so I think drink lots of wine. And then, there's nothing, your descriptor is not wrong. It might not be the right one, but you could add more descriptors. And I think these flavor wheels, if you've ever seen them, are really helpful.
Yep.
So beyond saying this tastes like palm fruit, all right, let's go a little bit deeper. Is it apple? Is it pear? Is it quince? Okay, let's go a little bit deeper than that. Is it a red apple? Is it a green apple? Let's keep going. Is it the apple skin? Is it cooked apple? So you could say the same things with like white flowers or grassy botanicals, herbaceous notes, stone fruit. So you could begin with stone fruit and then end up with like sour cherry. And so just the further you can go down, and that's really just practice, I think. Just really opening your senses and trying to just go a little bit further with your descriptions. it's pretty neat, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's really cool. And I love that, actually. That makes a lot of sense of, like, basically going down the kingdom, family tree, like, of, like, okay, so, like, let's large categorize this, and then let's go to the next level. Because then you're not feeling like, what I find is when I look at, like, those flavor wheels, you're all the way down to, like, black pepper, white pepper, like, heavy cinnamon, like so detailed. At that point, I'm like, how do I go from just tasting it to, like, yeah, cinnamon?
Yeah, right. And so you'll just start with, like, warm spices, right? Oh, yeah, this is warm spices. I kind of think of, like, the autumn or pumpkin pie or whatever else you have cinnamon in. And then you just kind of keep going at it until maybe you land at cinnamon. It In some cases, it can be difficult. I was doing this tasting. I took courses with the Cider Institute of North America, CINA, and they had a sensory analysis course, and I was at a loss for words. I have smelt this. I have tasted this. What is this? And I was thinking, it's nuts. It's nutty. What is this? And it turned out it was marzipan, which isn't even in my vocabulary, but it's almond, basically.
Yeah.
So I was on the right track. I just didn't have that word.
Yeah, very cool. So then, when you guys are making the cider, it's fermented, not brewed. Can you give us, like, a simplified version of the process you take to make cider?
Yeah, so making cider is under a winery license, and so it's absolutely not brewed at all. That would be under a brewery license. But so the way that we make cider, and there's many routes to get to the same destination, but how we make cider is here we've already started picking a little bit of fruit. It's mid-August right now. In the beginning of the month in September, we're going to be full on harvesting fruit all the way through part into mid-October. And so we pick fresh fruit off the tree, and we'll let it set out for a week or two. So any extra moisture that's in the apples is called sweating, kind of comes off, and the flavors and the sugars are more concentrated. And then we'll grind the apples down we mill them down to fine particles, and then we use a press to extract the juice. So the press squeezes all the juice out that you can. And then we'll continue doing that over and over and over until we fill large vessels. And then we do some laboratory analysis on the juice to see what the characteristics are. We look at the total acid, at the pH, at the sugar content, among other things. And then so we pitch yeast. Some people use the yeast that's naturally occurring on the fruit, and I'd be interested to start doing that more and more as my trees come into fruition. But for now, I really want the cider to come out, and that's sort of a gamble when you're just using what's naturally there. So we pitch yeast, and
What does that mean, pitch yeast?
dump it in.
Okay.
That's just the term. So
Okay.
we measure out a specific amount. So if we need to, we could adjust the pH or the total acidity or anything else, so that we have there's a term that says you're not really making cider, you're making a happy environment for the yeast. So as we said earlier, the yeast kind of controls the overall flavor, and so we want the medium, the liquid, which is the apple juice, to be in good ranges, and so that the yeast will be happy. So we add yeast to it, give it a stir, and then we just kind of let it do its thing. So we will probably finish all of our pressing just after Halloween. So we only press in season. When the fruit's ripe, we pick it, and then we press it, and then we ferment the juice. And then we just kind of let it do its thing. Some fermentations are faster or slower depending on the temperature. And then we'll revisit it after the winter time and start racking it, which it means so as the yeast die after. So the yeast produce two things. So they produce CO2 and alcohol. And then once they've done their job, they die and float down to the bottom. And so there'll be a cake of sediment on the bottom called the lees. And we'll rack the cider. So we'll take the juice, the liquid, the cider off of the lees, and that'll help to clarify it. And then we'll age it further, and probably in about March, we'll start filtering and then carbonating and bottling.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's basically how you make cider.
Yeah.
If you're interested, I'm teaching a class just up north at Cloud Mountain Farm Center. It's a nonprofit farm up near Bellingham.
Okay.
And I'm teaching a class there on September 3rd. It's a beginner's class on how to make cider. So we'll bring fresh juice that was just pressed, and I'll bring all the equipment, and everybody gets to take what they make. It should be a fun time.
Cool.
Yeah.
Very cool. So do you guys do all the picking, or do you guys have friends, family come over, or how do you guys do all the harvest?
So I'll just be picking a lot of fruit, and also, my wife is, her name is Heather, and she's part owner in everything that I have, and we also force our children to help us.
Nice.
That usually lasts for about an afternoon that they'll all come help, and so I'll just be picking. As my orchard grows more, definitely we'll have to have some labor come to help us. I'm also kind of planting things in a sort of futuristic method. Right here at WSU in Mount Vernon, they're trialing machines for mechanization of pruning and harvesting of apples.
Okay.
And so their machine, which looks like a really large berry picker, can go over the row and pick 100 feet of apple in about 10 minutes.
Wow.
And so that same row would probably take me, a day and a half.
Wow.
So I'm planting things in an orientation where this equipment can be used. I don't think I'll ever be able to own this equipment, but someday down the line, they probably will have a service where people buy this equipment and we'll come provide it for you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very cool. As far as the ciders that you make, what's one of your? I'm sure all of them you enjoy all of them, but what is kind of some of your favorite that you produce?
Sure. So I think kind of depending on the time of year, or what you're eating. If you're just having a cider and you want something sessionable, I think our dry cider is delightful. Our semi-sweet is the only one that I add an adjunct to. It has a little bit of local honey. It's not sweet, but it's not dry. It's a semi. And I think both of those are pretty sessionable. Having something with a meal, for instance, I brought you a couple single varietals, but our rosé, which just won a platinum award at Cidercraft magazine,
Wow.
it would be phenomenal with like fish tacos or fish seafood, chicken. Anytime in the summer, even just on the patio without food would be good.
Yeah.
It's quite bright and nice and tart, very aromatic and flavorful. I think like our Perry, which is really, really dry, would go nicely with something that's a little bit more rich in flavor. So like a stew or maybe some lamb, something like that. Mm-hmm. So often when you're food pairing with cider, there's a couple of C's to look for. So either something to complement the dish, something to contrast the dish, something from the same area. So I think wild caught salmon with this rosé would be delightful. Our wood age that I brought you, it's a single varietal. It's been aged 6 months in freshly emptied bourbon barrels. That's more of a sipper. Just sitting out by a nice fire in the autumn would be great with that.
Yeah, very cool. I'm so excited for those, by the way.
Oh, nice.
All right. So on top of all the other things that you've got going on right now, we're working towards building up our very first cider event here on Camano. So we're starting the Camano Ciderfest. Hopefully,
Woohoo!
yeah. So hopefully this is our first annual one. Tell us a little bit about what got you involved in it.
Yeah, so one of the people who have a place here in the Camano Commons, Brian, he has been a customer of mine for a while, and he was talking about the potential to have a cider fest. The area here is so beautiful. This amphitheater overlooking the ocean. I mean, you can't really get to a better spot.
Yeah.
And we're surrounded by all these great cideries. I wanted to help start something like this for a while, and I know quite a few people in the industry. So I was definitely on board. We got to meet you and our other co-contributors. And so having a venue that can facilitate all the people in such a beautiful spot, and my minor job of just knowing other people who are cider makers, I thought that was a good fit. And I want to be a part of it year after year. So hopefully successful. Anybody listening out there, it's September 2nd. You should come out. It's going to be nice weather and good cider.
Yeah, for sure. And we will have tickets. I'll have the link to the tickets below. In the show notes, we've got 2 different time slots that you can sign up for. I believe it's at 11 o'clock and a 2 o'clock, if I'm correct.
Yes.
And so if any during your window, you're able to go in and use your tokens to try out the different cideries that'll be here. There'll be live music. All the restaurants will be open that are here in the complex. It should be a good time.
Nice.
Looking forward to it.
I'm looking forward to it too.
So, awesome. And I forgot to ask, where can people find Alma cider in the stores and stuff?
Sure. So come find it where we make it. So we're on Mount Memorial Highway in Mount Vernon at Tulip Valley Winery, and that's where we make the cider. We're also in 26 stores, and so right here in Camano, we're at Tapped Camano. Check us out when you're here. And then we're at all the taps, actually. So Mukilteo and Edmonds, Mill Creek. And we're in Seattle. Look on our site. We have a list of all the places. So we're mostly
Perfect.
up north from Bellingham down to South Seattle.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, we'll definitely link to that in the show notes as well. So be sure to go check those out. I'm excited to try all the different ciders that you guys offer.
Nice.
Very cool. Well, I like to end every podcast with some rapid fire questions.
All right.
So the first one is, what purchase of $100 or less have you enjoyed the most in the last 3 months?
$100 or less. Let's see. I think this is going to be kind of a lame answer, but I have a little hand capper that I like to use just in my garage for my personal cider making.
Nice. Very cool. Who is the most influential person outside of your family in your life?
Most influential person. I think I actually have had a lot of great mentors and influencers. I think Dr. Carol Miles at the Extension in Mount Vernon. She is the interim director, and she's in charge of the horticulture department there. She was my committee chair, and she really just gave me a chance. And I had no agriculture experience, and she took me on to be her graduate student, and she's been a great influence.
Awesome. All right, this is a fill-in-the-blank question. I know this is weird, but I've always wanted to blank.
So someday, and I don't know when it'll be, but I'm going to drive from here in North America all the way down to the southern tip of Chile.
Very cool.
Yes.
That's awesome. All right. Who is an interesting or fascinating person that I should interview next?
Anybody who's going to be here for the Camano Ciderfest. I think there'll be a lot of interesting folks who are like-minded and want to grow things and make things and make people happy.
Yeah. All right. And lastly, what piece of advice would you give your 20-year-old self?
Don't go too big, too fast. Take your time. You'll get there.
Yeah.
I think that's it.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today.
Thank you.
All right. And Islanders, I will talk to you on the next one. Well, a big thank you to Dave Klawer for joining me on the podcast today, and thank you for listening. Don't forget to buy your tickets for Camano Ciderfest, the very first annual. You can only have one first, so let's make it a big one, and let's make sure that you guys are able to be there too, so you can have that on your bucket list there. Again, we'll have links to that in the description below, as well as all the different things that Dave and I talked about. And for more information on this episode, like I said, go to the show notes, or you can go to CamanoCommons.com/podcast to get a list of all of our other episodes, or listen to us on your favorite podcast platform. All right. Well, thank you so much, and I will talk to you on the next one.